Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're going to go through every setting in Starfield and tell you which settings are worth turning to Ultra and which are worth turning down to improve performance. That's right, optimization guides are back, and there's no better title to talk about right now than Bethesda Game Studios' hotly anticipated title. Starfield on PC is an interesting release. There are areas of the game that are visually stunning, there are areas of the game that look pretty average, there are areas that run really well, and there are areas that don't. And it's not always the worst looking areas that perform better. With such a vast number of planets and all sorts of different environments, from the interior of buildings and space combat to forested outdoor areas and barren wastelands, most gamers will have quite a varied experience. Bethesda also haven't done an especially amazing job of the PC version, with several features that I would class as critical in a modern AAA title being absent. Native HDR support, an FOV slider, gamma settings, and of course Nvidia's DLSS upscaling are all not found in the PC version, even though HDR, for example, is available on the Xbox version, so it seems like the console version received most of the attention. There's also a few weird setting choices, like the omission of any texture-related options and a heavy focus on FSR2 upscaling across the various presets. In today's video, I'm going to look at all the game's built-in quality options and show you what settings to use for the best balance between visuals and performance in some of the more demanding areas of the game. This is specifically a GPU optimization focused video, so we're mostly concerned about improving GPU limited performance rather than addressing CPU performance, which is likely to come in a future video from us. For that, we are benchmarking with an Nvidia GeForce RTX 3070, a mid-range to mainstream GPU that's representative of many systems and is in a performance class that needs optimization. We could have used something like an RTX 4090, but with that card you may as well crank everything to Ultra, so today's guide is focused on improvements for mid-range gamers. However, as I said, we are looking at GPU limited optimization, so the CPU used for testing is the AMD Ryzen 7 7800X3D with 32GB of DDR5 6000 CL30 memory on MSI's MPG X670E carbon Wi-Fi motherboard. This keeps a GPU limit firmly in place, though again we'll assess CPU limited optimizations later. All game visual captures that you'll see throughout the video are taken on an Nvidia GeForce RTX 4090, the beefy Asus ROG Strix model, and that's so we can provide high frame rate 4K quality comparisons. We recommend watching this at YouTube's maximum 4K quality mode. We're only going to be looking at footage and comparisons from the first 2 hours of the game up until you reach the first major settlement to avoid any spoilers. This is an exploration game after all, and I'm sure you'll want to discover everything for yourself rather than having it shown to you in this video. And before we get into things, each quality setting is split into a visual and performance section. The performance data is captured in a benchmark pass that's designed to give you a look at the impact of a setting on typical game performance, rather than spot checking FPS numbers, which isn't as accurate or representative of typical gaming. We've used two areas for benchmarking, one in New Atlantis and one in a forested area, which are some of the most GPU intensive areas we've found playing the game. However, like I said, Starfield is a varied game, so performance improvements will differ depending on where you are, but we feel testing in the most intensive areas sets a good foundation for the rest of the game. First up, a discussion on VRAM usage. Starfield plays well on cards with 8GB of VRAM or higher, and even 6GB at lower resolutions. Even on an RTX 4090, we rarely saw VRAM usage exceed 8GB, so it seems the game is working hard to keep VRAM usage below this level rather than scaling up to fit the buffer of higher end GPUs. This is great news for gamers with mid-range GPUs that are mostly 8GB these days. The game runs fine even up to 4K, though whether an 8GB GPU has the performance for 4K gaming is another question. There's also no texture options, so you don't even get a choice to dial things back. While this is great for many GPU owners that have been forced to stay on 8GB due to the choices of GPU manufacturers, it's pretty clear playing the game the compromises this has made to visual quality. There is quite a variety of texture quality in the game, ranging from good without being amazing to downright awful, especially viewing some objects at a mid to close distance. LOD viewing distances are also not amazing when looking at vast open areas compared to other recent games. There's no ray tracing either, a setting that typically increases VRAM usage. This leaves me a bit disappointed, as owners of higher end GPUs with 12GB or more of VRAM could definitely have benefited from an Ultra HD texture pack type of setting in the game. Texture scaling is practically non-existent, which isn't ideal for owners of, say, an RTX 4090 with 24GB to use. There's 4 main presets in the game which adjust the main settings as well as the render resolution, and all apply FSR2 by default. Ultra at 75% resolution scale, high at 62%, and medium and low both at 50%. This has quite a significant impact on visuals even without looking at the other differences. At 4K, both high and ultra look okay, but there's a pretty drastic decrease in image stability and detail, along with an increase in jagged edges when using medium and low. Take a look at this element for example, and how much more aliased it looks on medium and low. Now let's turn off FSR on the medium preset and compare that to the default medium preset with 50% render scale. Pretty large difference in visual quality. Here's another example showing a significant loss of detail from the default render scale options. That's not to say that resolution scaling is perfect with high or ultra either. In some areas I spotted noticeable stability issues even without moving, which is a common artifact with FSR2. These issues are removed when you change the upscaling option to off, which appears to revert to a native TAA presentation. For those after the best visual quality, using the Ultra preset with FSR2 disabled is definitely the way to go, and for those after medium or low, you'll see significantly better image quality if you increase the render resolution after applying those presets. And I should note here that everything has been tested with dynamic resolution off to allow for consistent results at the same resolution. Outside of resolution scaling, there isn't a massive difference between the Ultra and High presets, so for most gamers that just want to use presets, as always I'd recommend High over Ultra. Shadow quality is lowered slightly, as are a few other effects. The biggest difference is in foliage draw distance. The high preset culls a bit of grass in some areas, though if there's no grass around you probably won't notice this. Medium drops all the previous settings one notch again, so further reductions to shadow quality, effect quality, reflections and draw distance. The image doesn't have as much depth as Ultra, but this preset is still highly usable provided you increase the render resolution, as that has by far the biggest impact on the image. Meanwhile, the low setting drops everything again, shadows become noticeably weaker and foliage draw distance is hit big time. The world is much flatter with this setting, as things like ambient occlusion get dialed back, but I have seen much worse low settings than in Starfield, so for those with weaker hardware, you'll still get a lot of the environment details and ambience that you would get on higher settings. In terms of performance, in the city of New Atlantis using the default presets that include resolution scaling, I saw a 26% advantage using high over ultra, 66% using medium over ultra, and 85% using low over ultra. That's almost 2x scaling, though it's clear that much of that gain is made through dropping the render resolution. With FSR2 disabled, the high preset is now just 14% faster, the medium preset 32% faster, and low just 47% faster, which probably won't be sufficient for most gamers. For example, if you're only achieving 40 FPS in the city, dropping from ultra to low without also dropping the render resolution will see you fall just short of 60 FPS, which isn't great. In the forested area I tested, the performance differences are much larger. The default presets see a 58% gain moving from ultra to high, a 99% gain moving from ultra to medium, and a huge 152% gain from ultra to low. Given these are some of the most intensive areas we've found so far, mid-range gamers should definitely be using the high preset at most. Without upscaling, high delivers a 29% improvement in this area versus ultra, and medium a 43% improvement. These are the two obvious presets to use for most gamers. Ultra just isn't worth it. The setting with the biggest individual performance impact is shadow quality, so let's look at how visuals differ. Shadow definition is the sharpest on ultra and a bit blurry on high. Medium looks very similar to high, while low sees shadow detail drastically reduced. While ultra does look best, I think high doesn't hurt the experience all that much, and you'd see similar shadow quality that high produces in other games. Also important to note is shadow draw distance is affected by this setting. Ultra has excellent draw distance for high quality shadows, only peeling back to lower quality shadows after a fair way. The draw distance with high is reduced, but not by a deal-breaking amount. It's when we get to medium that I felt I could notice shadow pop in during regular gameplay, while with low it's quite distracting as shadow quality changes very close to the camera, and at a medium distances there's quite a huge drop off. When we look at performance in the city area, dropping from ultra to high provides a 9% performance improvement on average, which I feel is good given the visual difference. Medium though isn't worth it for just a 2% gain over high, and low is definitely not worth using given the huge sacrifice to visuals. This does change in the forested area though. Dropping from ultra to high sees a 26% performance improvement, which is absolutely massive for one setting, and is why I'd strongly recommend gamers use high shadows in this game. Medium over high provides an additional 12% gain, a good choice for those that need extra performance. Low is also 8% faster again here, but I feel that that's hard to justify. Indirect lighting is supposed to change the quality of global illumination, but as far as I can tell, this setting does very little. In the opening 2 hours of the game, as well as several planets further along in the story that I won't show to spoil it, I saw essentially no visual difference even between ultra and low. Now there may be some areas much later in the game where this setting does make a difference, but I haven't found it yet. I also saw no performance difference from this setting, which backs up what I saw visually. Steve also confirmed this on his system benchmarking the game, so who knows if it's broken or just something that only has a minor impact in some areas of the game, but it's not a setting to be concerned about. Reflections is a pretty straightforward setting. This one controls the resolution and definition of in-game reflections, which you'll see across many surfaces such as water, glass, and some metals. High looks the clearest, low looks the worst and quite bad in my opinion, with medium closer to high though noticeably reduced. Particularly in city areas and indoors, there are lots of surfaces that are impacted by this setting, so higher is better. In the New Atlantis area, I saw a 3% improvement dropping this setting from high to medium, and 4% using low over high. For this reason, I would avoid the low setting, and generally I would only turn this setting to medium if you needed additional performance, so it's one of the last settings I would turn down. In the forested areas and on other planets, the performance impact is much smaller, just a 1% difference here on average. Particle quality is another setting where I couldn't really figure out what this setting impacts visually. I saw little to no difference shooting weapons, looking at explosions, observing fires, or assessing smoke effects. There likely is some impact here somewhere, I just couldn't find it in time for this video. In my testing, I only saw a small 2% improvement to 1% low performance, changing this setting from high to medium, so I'd probably do that, but again, I'm not really sure what this setting does in terms of affecting the visuals in the game, so seeing a small performance improvement between a couple of settings makes sense. Volumetric lighting affects the resolution and accuracy of the volumetric effects in the game, so things like rays shining through a window, light blooming into a bit of fog or mist. The difference between each setting is very subtle. In fact, I saw little difference at all between high and ultra. When set to medium, there is a drop in quality, but for most gamers, you probably won't even notice, and you could say even that, medium is just artistically different to ultra. Low seems to blur out the volumetric effect a bit and reduce definition, though it doesn't remove them entirely, so again, could be worth using. One of the only ways I was able to discern a difference here was to look at the definition of volumetric effects in motion, where medium is a drop compared to ultra. I really had to look for this though. In many scenes, it has next to no obvious difference, making it a great candidate for optimization. In New Atlantis, I saw a 3% performance improvement, dropping the setting from ultra to medium, and there was a 5% gain from low over ultra. In the forest area, I saw a 2% gain for medium and 3% gain for low. I'd recommend using medium here, with low if you need extra performance. Seriously, don't be afraid of using low here. It doesn't disable this effect and the game still looks good. Crowd density controls the number of NPCs spawned. The best way I can describe this is showing our benchmark passes. Using the high setting, I counted roughly 70 NPCs through the pass, medium had about 60 NPCs, and low about 45. Changing this setting doesn't immediately drop NPC count in your viewport, but it does appear to control the rate of NPCs that spawn in as you move around the world. High makes the world feel the most dense. This setting has little impact when GPU limited. In the city area, where there were a lot of NPCs, I saw just a 2% improvement dropping from high to low. This is something to further explore when CPU limited in a future video, but for GPUs, I'd probably just leave this on high. Motion blur is a classic feature that most gamers will be familiar with. Unfortunately, Starfield combines camera and object motion blur into the one setting, so as you turn down motion blur from high to low, the quality and blurriness of both camera and object blur reduces. It would have been nice to see the low setting, for example, turn off camera motion blur while preserving per object blur, which is a configuration some gamers like. The quality of motion blur in this game is generally okay, though personally I like to disable this feature. There's not a huge difference between the three motion blur on settings and only a 2% gain on average from disabling the feature entirely. I'd recommend setting it to off, but this is a personal preference thing. GTAO Quality controls ambient occlusion quality, and this typically manifests as a difference in the resolution and apparent strength of shadowing between close objects like a pipe and the wall or the corners of a bookshelf. There isn't a huge difference between Ultra and High. Ultra is slightly darker, but it can be hard to tell. Medium drops the quality a bit, though it's really on Low where you'll notice the flattest world and lack of depth. This setting is very similar to ambient occlusion settings in other games, so you might be familiar with the impact it has. In Starfield, I saw a 2% improvement moving from Ultra to High, which isn't massive, but I also saw a similar improvement for the Medium setting, which means that High is worth using over Medium. The Low setting drops quality a fair bit for a very minimal uplift in performance, so it's not worth using. In the forest areas, the impact from this setting is less than in the city, but still a small gain using High instead of Ultra. Grass quality is an extremely straightforward option. The higher the grass setting, the longer draw distance you will see for foliage, and the more foliage you will get in general. The areas where you can see far into the distance, Ultra to High to Medium, all has a predictable cadence of grass reduction. Low then really peels things back to the point where even close grass is affected. In areas with a shorter view distance, it's really only the Low setting that has a large impact, although Medium can also be noticeable. In city areas with little foliage, it makes sense that this setting has no performance impact. In our forest test area, there is also very little impact with our mid-range GPU while GPU limited. Only the Low setting saw a 2% performance improvement at a huge cost to visuals. I'd recommend for most gamers setting this to Ultra, provided you are GPU limited, and we'll explore CPU limits in the future. Contact shadows is a very subtle effect in Starfield, to the point where I found it almost impossible to tell the difference between Ultra, High and Medium. In most scenes, the time of day difference with shadows moving slightly from capture to capture is more noticeable than any impact from this setting. The one exception to this is the Low setting, which does reduce or eliminate some contact shadows, such as here. It's no surprise to see that contact shadows has a minimal performance impact. In city areas, I saw a small improvement from Medium versus Ultra, and similar in the forest areas. A reasonable 4% gain is achievable using Low, which I'd recommend for gamers after the biggest performance increase, as the Low setting is still relatively subtle overall. For everyone else, I'd use Medium. Variable rate shading is a setting that does what it says in the name. It adjusts the rate of shading depending on the content on screen, reducing the shading rate for less important areas. I didn't see any noticeable difference between the setting on or off, and the default is on for all presets. There may be some areas where it has an impact, I just didn't see them on a general look throughout the game. It also has a minimal performance impact. Turning off VRS only dropped my frame rate by 1%, so it doesn't appear as though this is a particularly deep VRS implementation, so I'd recommend keeping it on. Film grain and depth of field are the remaining settings, and both are personal preference things. Film grain has no performance impact, so you can safely tune this to your liking. Depth of field has no performance impact for general gameplay, but turning it off will deliver a 3% improvement to performance for character interactions. When you talk to a character, it zooms to their face and blurs out the background. Disabling depth of field disables that blur effect and slightly improves performance. This isn't a crucial setting for general performance throughout the game. Lastly, I wanted to talk about upscaling in this game. The settings on offer here are lackluster, just upscaling off, reverting to native TAA, FSR2, and CAS upscaling, which is just spatial upscaling with a sharpening filter. There are no modes here. Starfield instead uses a resolution slider and even allows you to run FSR2 at a 100% resolution scale. As far as anti-aliasing goes, so running either upscaling off, CAS at a 100% render scale, or FSR2 at a 100% render scale, you're best off either using upscaling off or CAS with sharpening set to your liking. Upscaling off is softer but less prone to motion artifacts than FSR2 even at a 100% render scale, and CAS is slightly sharper. For general upscaling and using a lower render resolution, the output quality is determined significantly by your native resolution. CAS is garbage at upscaling, so I wouldn't recommend it. Seriously, the 50% render scale image using CAS is not safe to show on this screen. You'll instantly be sick and regret ever seeing it. It's that awful. FSR2 in the game is okay, but it suffers from some of the known flaws with FSR2 that we've covered in previous content. This game's implementation actually handles tree foliage quite well, something we've seen it struggle with in other titles. Grass is also, it's okay, there is some sizzling, and typically FSR2 reduced ghosting compared to running native TAA with upscaling off. It's other elements that still suffer from flickering and stability issues, especially any textures or geometry with straight, clean lines. There's a lot of that throughout the game, the interiors of ships and buildings in particular. FSR2 also reduces fine detail when used on lower settings, like a 50% render scale, which can make the presentation look a bit blurry or muddy. Whether or not FSR2 upscaling makes sense to use depends highly on your native screen resolution. At 4K, I thought it generally looked good down to around a 67% render scale, which corresponds to the FSR2 quality mode in other games. 75% is used for the Ultra preset in Starfield, and to me, that's a fine setting to use. The high preset uses 62% though, which I think does introduce some artifacts at 4K. At 1440p, FSR2 struggles, and this is something that we've seen before in other games. The native TAA implementation isn't amazing at 1440p either, but even using FSR2 at 75% at 1440p sees a noticeable drop in image stability. Anything below 70% doesn't look all that great, and at 50% I'd say the image quality is pretty bad. 80 or 85% is probably the limit for reasonable image quality using FSR2 at this resolution, but that doesn't exactly provide a huge performance uplift. At 1080p, I find it difficult to recommend upscaling at all. The native TAA does struggle here, but FSR2 struggles more to maintain a stable, clean image. This isn't a very good outcome, as the lower presets like medium and low set FSR2 to a 50% render scale, which at 1080p looks atrocious. I think that's a big mistake, as gamers with weaker hardware are more likely to be playing at 1080p on lower quality presets. Unfortunately though, it also might be the only viable way to get decent performance on a lower tier card. As for upscaling performance, these are my results at 1440p on an RTX 3070. Using FSR2 at 100% render scale saw a 6% performance drop versus native at worse image quality in my opinion, so rule that out. CAS sharpening saw a 1% hit, so that remains viable. Then we saw a 15% performance gain for 75% scaling, 23% at a 67% render scale, and 30% at a 60% render scale. CAS performed better, offering a 20% improvement at a 75% render scale for a much worse image. Whether or not this is worth using will depend highly on your final resolution and tolerance for artifacts. Combining all of these recommendations together, we have the hub quality and hub performance presets, noting that we aren't recommending upscaling options here. If you want to improve performance while maintaining a very good presentation, we'd recommend relative to ultra settings, turning down shadow quality to high, particle quality and volumetric lighting to medium, motion blur to off, GTAO quality onto high, and contact shadows on medium. If you want a further performance improvement using our hub performance preset, drop shadow quality and reflections to medium, set volumetric lighting to low, GTAO quality to medium, and contact shadows to low. These presets in our new Atlantis test area offer a 19% and 35% performance improvement over the Ultra preset respectively. This makes hub quality a little more performant than high settings while maintaining settings like grass quality, while the hub performance preset is similar to medium with better image quality. The advantages are more significant in the forest area. Hub quality offers a 39% improvement compared to Ultra, while hub performance offers a 64% gain versus Ultra. Most of this comes down to the reduction in shadow quality and volumetric lighting, with a few other stacked benefits. This makes hub quality more like medium in performance in these areas, with hub performance more like low, while looking significantly better in my opinion, but typically you will only see these sorts of performance gains in these forested areas. The rest of the game is much more like what you see in that city area testing. And you can see the quality improvements here. Using the hub quality settings, in my opinion, delivers image quality between the high and ultra presets. Though of course, it will depend on the area of the game you are in. Gamers after the ultimate visuals will still want to push settings like shadows, volumetric lighting, and GTAO to the max, but this is a good compromise. Hub performance is a juiced up medium settings with a few benefits, especially to grass draw distance if your system is GPU limited, while dropping a few settings to low like volumetric lighting and contact shadows with only a small hit to visuals. This configuration doesn't look as good as the hub quality preset, but it is still a great way to play for those with mid-range GPUs that aren't satisfied with the presets on offer and want more performance. Overall, it is possible to improve Starfield's performance on PC with only a small hit to visual quality, leading to a more balanced experience than what Bethesda offers in the game through presets. On my RTX 3070 system, ultra settings without upscaling at 1440p wasn't a great experience, as I was only getting around 30 to maybe 40 FPS in the most intensive areas. With some tweaking, it's easily possible to get a 20% improvement to frame rate before needing to mess around with resolution scaling while maintaining pretty good visual quality. I'm sure there will be a wide variety of opinion on how Starfield runs and whether the visuals justify the performance. I think this is quite an intensive game to run, and I'm not sold on how it looks in some areas. Texture quality in particular could have been improved to deliver a sizable improvement to the presentation at a minimal performance cost on GPUs with enough VRAM. But it's hard to deny that some of the handcrafted cities and ships do look fantastic anyway, and with some tweaks you can achieve acceptable levels of performance. There's plenty of room for improvement here. Bethesda need to add in standard PC features for a AAA game like HDR and FOV slider and gamma settings. Modders have already created an FOV mod for the game, which is good to see, but it should be a native option. I also think the visual scaling relies too heavily on resolution scaling rather than quality scaling, though I'm not sure how much further things can be cut back without affecting the ambience of the game. Unfortunately, this means that gamers on mainstream hardware will likely have to play on fairly low settings at 1080p with mediocre upscaling. Speaking of upscaling, there is a mod for Starfield that swaps FSR2 for DLSS or XeSS already, which I'd recommend trying for those that have Nvidia GPUs. Especially when gaming at 1440p or 1080p, FSR2 in Starfield is not great, as we've seen from AMD's upscaling tech in other games, so DLSS will likely deliver superior image quality. I didn't have much time to mess around with mods in this game though, instead focusing on the game's built-in options, but I'm just making you all aware that a mod does exist, and really Bethesda should have included DLSS in the game anyway, especially if they were going to be relying so heavily on upscaling for some of their visual presets. If they want to use upscaling so significantly, they probably should have included the best upscaling option for people with Nvidia GPUs. Anyway, that's it for this optimization guide. Hopefully this will be useful for people that are just starting to play Starfield now. Obviously at this point we're sort of very early into Starfield in terms of patches and things like that. Both AMD and Nvidia do already have game-ready drivers, so that's not so much of an issue, but I would expect some patches to hopefully improve performance and add in features in the future. Things like the indirect lighting setting, for example, maybe that is bugged at the moment and we'll see that fixed in a future patch or something, but this is how the game is performing now for people that are jumping in right away. We will be back soon with a look at performance, overall performance in Starfield across a range of GPUs, so check that out if that's not already on the channel by the time you're watching this. And yeah, if you want to support our testing and videos like this, if you want to say, hey, keep making the optimization guides, then please do consider supporting us directly through our Patreon or Floatplane. Links are in the description below. You'll gain access to some cool benefits like BTS content, Discord chat, and all that sort of stuff. So thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.